Well, hey, good evening, guys. It's great to be with you all. Redemption and Icon. Why don't we together stand to our feet? I just, last night, was sitting in the back reflecting on just watching the fact that we're two entirely different churches coming together. Like, I don't know a lot of you guys. I know some of you guys from Redemption. But just the, beauty of the fact that Alex, just the beauty of two separate congregations coming together, and the fact that we believe what we believe, and we experience what we experience in these separate homes and separate churches and separate experiences and jobs, and we come together and we can still sing about the one who saves, and we can still sing about the one who redeems and who rescues us. And I don't think it's a coincidence, and I don't think it's we should take it lightly, the fact that we can come together in a way of peace, in a way of grace, and actually experience the truth, experience the mercy and the grace of God together as a community, not just as Icon and Redemption, but just as God's children together. So as we sing King of My Heart, I just want us to think about the beauty of the fact that if you look around, we're here, we're doing this together, and that is such a wonderful, wonderful thing that we get to experience. So let's sing this out together. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. Let's sing it again. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, 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 you're never gonna let me down. 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 Let's shout this out together. You're never gonna let me down. 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 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good. Oh, you're never gonna let me down. 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 Amen.
Welcome. Hi. Thank you, Icon. Thank you, Redemption, for being here. Like I said last night, this is our first ever marriage retreat combined with Icon Church. We're here at the building that we meet at. I also want to welcome those who are joining us online. There were people who are watching online. My name is Lisa Eichelberger. I'm the director of women's ministry at Redemption Church, and I'm really happy to be here with you tonight. So just want to welcome you and say thank you for being here, and we hope you enjoy your night. We hope, again, you are able to receive all that the Spirit of God wants to offer you tonight, and that will be really different for each person standing here. So, just praying that this is really a deep blessing for each one of us, myself included. So we're going to continue worshiping, and then Mark is going to come and teach us tonight. So we'll keep singing.
Your heart is for me. Your ear is listening. I'm safe in your love. Your army of angels watch over me. You're always present. You're always with me. For all of my life, your favor has followed. You're my Father. You guys got it. I have never walked alone. I've never been abandoned. You are my inheritance. You are my strength and shield, and I have confidence. You go before me. You're my deliverer, and I know I'll never walk alone. You're always faithful. You're always faithful. You're strong and able. I'm lifting my head. In you I find help. You're my providence. We sing, I've never walked. I've never walked alone. I've never been abandoned. You are my inheritance. You are my strength and shield, and I have confidence. You go before me. You're my deliverer, and I know I'll never walk alone. Let's get us sing every hour. And every hour, every minute, you have always been there. You are faithful, and you always will be. In every triumph, every failure, you are loyal to me. You are faithful, and you always will be. In every hour, every minute, you have always been there. You are faithful, and you always will be. In every triumph and every failure, you are loyal to me. You are faithful, and you always will be. And you are faithful, and you always will be. And I have never walked alone. I've never been abandoned. You are my inheritance. You are my strength and shield, and I have confidence. You go before me. You're my deliverer, and I know I'll never walk alone. I've never been abandoned. You are my inheritance. You are my strength and shield, and I have confidence. You go before me. You're my deliverer, and I know I'll never walk alone. And every hour, every minute, you have always been there. You are faithful, and you always will be. In every triumph and every failure, you are loyal to me. You are faithful, and you always will be. Every hour, every minute, you have always been there. You are faithful, and you always will be. In every triumph, every failure, you are loyal to me. You are faithful, and you always will be. You are faithful, and you always will be. Just before we sing our next song, one thing that we do often here at Redemption is just take a moment of silence. And it's just to regather ourselves and to just recenter ourselves and to just be reminded that the Spirit of God is here and with us. And I just want us to just take a moment to just hear these lyrics that we're going to sing together. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from you, maker of heaven, creator of the earth. I need you, Lord. You are my only hope. You're my only prayer. I will wait for you to come and rescue me and give me life. And just as we were singing that last song, in every triumph and every failure, it's making me think of the fact that we're at a marriage conference, and we're all trying to learn and grow. We're trying to figure out, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong? And if you're married for more than 10 minutes, you know that there's sometimes a lot of failure, and it's not as much triumph as we thought we were going to experience. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of weight, and there's also a lot of joy, and there's a lot of goodness, and there's a lot of grace in it. And one of the beautiful things about what we get to experience as Christians is that there's more to our experience than just the pragmatics of what we can do and how we can talk and how we can just line everything up right to get it just right so that we can get the outcome that we want in our marriage. It's actually placing our rest and our trust and all of our insufficiency on God. And so why don't we just take a moment of silence? I know it might be awkward for 30 seconds, but why don't we do it, and then we'll continue to sing together.
I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from you, maker of heaven, creator of the earth. Oh, how I need you, Lord. You are my only hope. You are my only prayer. So I will wait for you to come and rescue me, to come and give me life. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from you, maker of heaven, creator of the earth. Oh, how I need you, Lord. You are my only hope. You are my only prayer. So I will wait for you to come and rescue me, to come and give me life. Oh, how I need you, Lord. You are my only hope. You are my only prayer. So I will wait for you to come and rescue me, to come and give me life. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from you, maker of heaven, creator of the earth. And as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. And you alone. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. Sing, you're my friend. You're my friend, and you are my brother, even though you are my king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. And you alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. Let's close out singing, This Is My Father's World. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas. His hands the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world. The birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. Come on, we sing. This is my Father's world. He shines in all that's fair, in rustling grass I hear him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. With joy we sing, this is my Father's world. Oh, let me never forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. And this is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King. Let the heavens ring. God reigns rains, let the earth be glad. Let's sing that one more time. This is my Father's word. Oh, let me never forget that though the wrong seems off so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King. Let the heavens ring. God reigns. Let the earth be glad. The Lord is King. Let the heavens ring. God reigns. Let the earth be glad.
Seriously, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for leading us in worship. What a blessing. It really is. I know Lisa mentioned it before, Alex mentioned it last night, Josh mentioned it last night, but just having both our congregations come together and being able to worship together is such a blessing, such an encouragement, I think, to each of us. As Alex said last night, we don't usually transition into any sort of talk or anything like this without first greeting one another, and just a reminder that our faith is not something that we do just as individuals with God, but this is also us connecting as a body, or as two bodies coming together. And so I just want to encourage you, just take a few minutes just to greet someone maybe that you don't know, just welcome them to our marriage conference, to worshiping together as our two bodies. So I'll let you do that before we get started, and then we'll get underway. All right, all right. I know. I have no more control. All right, if you get a chance to head back to your seats. All right. Awesome, thank you. I'm not gonna lie, usually with redemption, I have to work way, way harder than that. Alex is good at this. Alex can always get them to sit down. I never can. But it's so good just to watch you guys hanging out together and getting to know each other. That's so fun. Man, what marriage conference is any good without a talk about reconciliation? I hear, thank you. I hear marriage can be tough. For those who have been involved for a little bit, that sometimes we sin against each other, that sometimes we come at these sort of impasses with one another. Sometimes they're worse than others, yeah? Sometimes they're worse than others. Preach. There's an amen. Thank you. Yeah, Brady should know because he's resolved since you're talking. Now I'm going to call you out. Brady, and I'll embarrass him, but I'll thank you publicly because both he and his wife, when my wife and I lived in Portland, we had a very, very hard 2.5 years living in Portland. We had our first experience with spiritual abuse there, and then our second, which really almost cost us our marriage. It was very, very difficult for us in our relationship with the church and all of those things. Brady and BJ, here we go. You know who you know the emotional speaker. He brings water. Brady and BJ lived in Bellingham at the time and would periodically drive down to Portland just to counsel and to be present with us. That's a good drive. And I appreciate you taking the time because I'm still married. And so what a good reminder that's part of reconciliation is often having community coming in around you when it's difficult and being present with you and helping you communicate and helping you talk and work through all those things. Before we get too far into this, I want to encourage you with something. You can sit very theoretical in a discussion on reconciliation or forgiveness or covenant or any of those elements. You can sit in a lot of theory on that. I would not if I were you. I think if you really want to engage with this, I want you to be present to that. I want you to go a place in your marriage or in your experience with marriage, even if you're not married with your parents, maybe you saw some of this. I want you to go to a place where it was hard, where it looked like it was going to break. I think that's the best place to engage a subject like this, is to think about the time when it was really hard, when you didn't want to roll over and see your spouse next to you, when you were really having to lean into the vows that you made on your wedding day, that now we're here. Now we're here. We're at a broken spot in our marriage. What are we going to do? I would engage this talk from there. Secondly, I want to throw 2 caveats out there because we're talking about reconciliation and making it work and seeing things through. I think it's worth saying, or just publicly stating, that God never intended you to stay in an abusive relationship. And if you feel like you have been physically abused or emotionally abused or sexually abused in your relationship, I would encourage you, I would implore you pastorally to find a licensed counselor, to find a trusted close friend, to find a trusted pastor, and evaluate that with them. as to whether or not this is an abusive relationship that maybe ought to be beyond reconciliation. I don't think that is God's plan for you. If your spouse is beating you, I would not hold a John Piper position on that. I would encourage you to find a counselor. And look at whether or not it makes sense to walk away from that relationship, even though the arc of God's work in all relationship is healing, and that continues to be his ideal. That ought to be our hope. But I think we also have to be realistic when it's not you and God in a covenant, it's you and another sinner. And sometimes that's just not possible. The second is this: if either you or your partner is unwilling to reconcile, you cannot reconcile. Both parties have to be willing to come back to the table and entertain the idea of reconciliation. If you've got one who is going to sabotage it and who has simply lost interest and moved on, and you cannot get any piece of them to come back. I used to have a counseling professor at Western, Norm Thiessen, and Norm used to say, if you ask him on a scale of 1 to 10, how much hope do you have for this marriage? How much hope do you have for this moving forward in any capacity? If they cannot give you a 1, if they've got to go to a 0, you're probably wasting money at this point. We can be discouraged over the last season, but there has to be a desire, there has to be a hope for reconciliation and for pursuing that. Why would somebody be unwilling? I think there's a number of reasons. I think the first category is that you have some people that are in a place where they're not capable, they're incapable of changing. Some of these can be worked on or addressed with different tools. Some examples could be sensory issues or more severe cases of PTSD or ADHD or dysfunctional family of origin. Again, this can be addressed, but I think there's a lot of groundwork that has to happen for that person to come around and be willing to reconcile. Second category would be that they're capable of changing, but they just flat refuse to do so. That they've become so embittered with how things have gone in the marriage that it's gone too far. John Gottman, some of you are probably familiar with John. If you've done any research on how to heal your marriage, John might have come up. He's at the University of Washington, so he's a local guy. And he has a metaphor. He calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And these are, they're metaphors that help predict the end of the relationship and whether or not it's going to be rescuable. He gives 4. Carried too far, I think some of these are going to rise to that level of unwillingness. One of them is that criticism is present. So this isn't offering a critique or some helpful feedback for your spouse. It's disparaging them. It's an attack on your partner's character. It's an attack on your partner's character. The feedback is intended to make the partner feel rejected and attacked and hurt, and it tends to escalate from there. The second one is contempt that he has. This is when you're exuding or communicating an air of superiority over the other person. You think you're better than them. And the intent is to make the other partner feel worthless and undesirable. And John says that this one, the contempt piece, is the greatest predictor of divorce in a marriage. The third is defensiveness. This is generally a response to criticism. It's an attempt to deflect criticism. You can't bring that in. You can't accept any bit of that. You have to deflect it. It's failure to take ownership for legitimate missteps in your marriage. Failure to take ownership makes the other person feel incredibly unheard. Defensiveness. And the final one is stonewalling. It's where a person fully withdraws from the interaction. They stop responding. It's a choice to stonewall. It's often caused by feeling overwhelmed, but it halts any progress that could be made there. All right. Assume someone is willing. Let's go there. What if somebody is willing? Where do we go? What do we do with that? How do you possibly start? I think one thing that is really helpful, I would be aware of Gottman's 4. If you're not familiar with those, I would be aware of those in your marriage, and aware of whether you see pieces of those even in their infancy coming up. So certainly be aware of those. But even if you're not operating in any of those 4, you still have a means of responding to conflict. You still have a natural way of doing that. I think tools like knowing your Enneagram number, if you're into that, are really helpful. Are helpful to share with your spouse, that they understand what stressed out you looks like, and they understand what healthy you looks like in your personality and how that comes out. All of us respond to conflict. You know, the fight, flight, freeze. Depending on who you read on, there's a few more there. But how do you respond in the middle of that? There's the fight that stays put, that digs in. There's the flight that runs, that doesn't want to discuss. There's the freeze that will avoid for days, allow time to pass without addressing any of it. There's the fawning, I think, which is worth adding on there. It's becoming agreeable so as to minimize the pain and avoid it. You just make the problem go away with time. You don't actually engage with it and do anything about it. And arguably, I would even add a 5th one. I was trying to come up with an F. I would call it faking it. Faking it is a response to conflict where we just don't work on things. We tolerate things over time, but we just don't bring it up and have any chance to dig in and actually look at properly diagnose what's happening here. I really like what Josh said last night when he was talking about God's honesty with us, that when God confronts our sin, it's all out in the light, that there's no minimizing of it. But that it's all out in the light, and then we address it. You can't do that with faking it. Your family of origin can dictate this. Your past experience and conflict can dictate this. And those aren't necessarily wrong. But knowing your stress response, knowing where you tend to go, and again, sharing that with your spouse, your aim in healing really ought to be to aid and grow the communication that you have in your marriage. Be able to communicate with one another. And so I think letting your spouse know, or figuring that out together, of this is what it looks like when I'm stressed. This is what it looks like when I'm in the midst of conflict. This is what it looks like for me, so that they understand that experience and they're helping you work through that. Because the whole point of this is to promote communication so that you guys understand each other and really finally start to click again. Ahead of time, I would recommend setting ground rules as to how you argue. What are the rules? The I need space heard by someone with attachment issues is going to be or abandonment issues is going to be very hard to hear. But when that's discussed prior to getting into an argument, it gives you the groundwork as to how this goes. Can I call a timeout? Can I step into the other room to process? Because for me and for my one of the 5 F's, being able to back away is what's helpful for me. For you to know that for your spouse, that won't be taken as a threat, but that seen as no, you are actively working towards a resolution here by doing that. But sometimes those are so misinterpreted. Those are so misinterpreted in the midst of an argument. But if they'd just been discussed beforehand, you'd be in such a better place to do that. You'd have a framework of doing that, of moving forward. In conflict, we've started talking about this in staff at Redemption. That conflict, how do we say it? Conflict is the opportunity for creativity. Conflict is the opportunity or the birthplace of creativity. It's a chance to come alongside and work on something together. Your marriage is not the conflict, but you have two parties that can come along and get creative and work through a conflict that's happening in your marriage. It's a project. It's a project that you can come to and come up with creative solutions to work through that and process through that. All right. It's a lot of good practical stuff, I hope. I hope some of it was practical. You'll get one more really practical piece at the end. We have a lot of ideas as to how to relate to one another, but if we're Christians, I assume we all are, if we're Christians, we ought to at least have some thought to look to how God handles conflict. That really our model as to how to do this really well is to be understood by watching how God handles this, how Jesus handles this in some cases, how Yahweh handles this in some cases. But it's good to look at that and at least see how that's illustrated, because again, our marriage is supposed to be an example of the gospel writ large. It's an experienced gospel with another person. All of that reconciliation, all that healing, all of that forgiveness is an image of the gospel. So if it's going to be that, we ought to look to God to see what he would model for us. The first way he shows it is the foundation of his relationship, that it is through covenant that you have that a covenant relationship. That's how he describes it. Covenant is rooted in the image of partnership. It is doing something together. And so when God covenants with Israel, or God covenants with any individual person, it's always in partnership to go do something together. And in Christian marriage, we talk about marriage, again, imaged off of that, of this is us entering into partnership to do something together, to work alongside one another, to sanctify one another, to be on mission together, to do these things. But we're in covenant together. We've made a bond, we've made a promise together. And that's how God relates to us as well. God makes promises, and the other party makes commitments back to God. And we have a covenant agreement. That's great. That's super helpful. Fast forward. God's relationship with Israel, or with anyone that he makes a covenant with, is spotty on a good day. It's definitely, Israel is a tough covenant partner. Any human is a tough covenant partner. It's true in our marriage as well. And ultimately, what we needed was Jesus to come and to be the good, perfect covenant partner that would finally be able to participate in the work with God and bring us back into relationship with him. The alternative relationship that we have, that humans have kind of come up with, is a contract relationship, right? And I'll hit this quick, but the basic idea of a contract is you ink your agreement. You say, this is what this is going to look like, and you lay out, I think what attorneys would call the things you need to perform, the things you need to do. And as long as you do those things, that's great. But a contract's goal is to define liabilities when things go wrong. What am I going to be responsible for? How is this going to work? It's the same thing with your lease agreement, right? If you've got one of those. When you wreck the house, how is this going to go down? That's all it is defining how that's going to work. How you're going to, whether or not you have to stay in this relationship or whether or not you can get out. That's the intention behind it. And I do think a lot of marriages, both Christian and secular, work out of that model. Whether we actually wrote it down or not, I have a set of expectations that I think you ought to align with. And if you don't align with those, namely making me happy, if you don't make me happy, and I feel like I would be happier outside of this relationship, I should get out. I should get out because YOLO, you only live once. So why would I be stuck in this marriage with this spouse who doesn't meet my expectations? So therefore, I jet. I get out. I grab a divorce attorney. We work this out. And if I was smart, I signed a prenup. I mean, what an image of contract, right? That's how you might relate to someone. But covenant is so different than that. It's intentionally different because God is different. And God is always working on this arc of reconciliation. He's always aiming towards healing. And so our concern should never be in a covenant how you might get out of it, because the aim is always to fix it. The aim is always to land in a healed position. The aim is always remedy and continued relationship. I love Jeremiah 31. I love the language that he uses here. I think this is helpful. You guys might know this one. Jeremiah 31 to 33 says this. It says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband." Real nice covenant language there. Declares the Lord. "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I'll write it on their hearts, and I'll be their God, and they shall be my people." So God very intentionally uses marriage language. He calls himself the husband of Israel. We're covenant partners here. And in spite of Israel's failure, and if you've read Jeremiah, you know it's not going well. It's not at all going well. But God shows himself willing to be present with them and move forward in the relationship towards healing. This is, God dealing with Israel, and he uses the language of adultery with them all the time. All the time. This is like God walking into the bedroom with someone in bed with your spouse and saying, geez, I'm going to need this other person to go so that we can fix this. And even though you are caught red-handed in this, I'm going to be your covenant partner. We're going to figure out how to move forward together. We're going to figure out what healing will look like. Sorry. I choke up there. My wife has never cheated on me. That she's in the back. No, but seriously, it's serious like that, right? God has been watching Israel and watching their behavior ad nauseum, their faithlessness, on repeat, all the time. And yet, because this is not a contract relationship, because he is so rooted in covenant, in the promise that he made with them, his aim is not their destruction. His aim is their healing. How are we going to move forward with this? This whole writing law on tablets and writing it down in the Torah is not going to work. I'll come up with another idea as to how we might approach this. Maybe I'll put it on your hearts and on your soul, on your spirit. Maybe then we could move forward. Maybe then we could be covenant partners. But think of that. Think of this interaction with Israel. He emphasizes the covenant. I will be your God, you will be my people, I will be your covenant husband, and I'm going to restore you. It's all towards healing. It's all towards healing. Every bit of it. Oh, how are we doing on time? We're okay. I have an illustration here, and I was like, it might get emotional, but we'll hit it really quick. Man, I'll tell you what, there's no greater gift than a covenant. There really isn't. And you really only know how good your covenant is when it's been tested. When you think that your spouse might actually walk away on you, or when you think you have screwed up so bad that there's no way they'd stick it out with you. Jeez. Here we go. Several years ago, I opened a brewery. Took a hobby too far and kept going and didn't stop. And so we opened a brewery. And within a couple of months of that, we knew that was a very bad decision. The beer's good, but the finances were not quite what we expected them to be. And the build-out had taken way too long. And we were 2 months into it, and we were pretty sure that all three partners were going to need to declare bankruptcy. That was going to be the remedy. And so On my 10th wedding anniversary, I had the pleasure of meeting with an attorney to discuss the difference between chapters 7, 11, 13 bankruptcy. Everybody know the chapters? There's lots of them. And looking at what my options were and which ones would allow me to keep my house and which ones might not. And what reconciling with my creditors would look like. And so my wife and I, because it's our 10th wedding anniversary, I mean, we can't stay in town. We got to go party, right? We're driving up to Bellingham, because Bellingham's where the party is at. And we're driving up there, and I've just met with this attorney. So you've got to be thinking an hour and a half to 2 hours north on 5. When is that going to come up? When does the lull in the podcast come up? And when are we going to do this? But we don't. She had so much grace and mercy for me. But we finally sit down to dinner, and we had some really good fried pickles there. Since we're into food, right, Josh? And she said, okay, explain it to me. And so I'm doing my best to explain my layman's terms of how we are going to move forward from this part of our marriage, that we're going to declare bankruptcy and, do whatever. And we get to the end of it. Talk about needing a beer. We get to the end of it, and she goes, I want you to know that I'd do it all over again with you. Even if we declare bankruptcy, even if we're done, even if we lose the house, for all the fights with my parents, for almost losing our marriage a year prior, or 3 years prior, that I do it all over again with you. That is the greatest safety net to be real with your spouse that you will ever get. That it can be so broken, and that they are still in. That they're still in it with you. There's no greater safety than that. The covenant is so tight. And to say we could be on the streets, we could be in a box, but we'll be on the box together is so good. It's such a blessing. It was so healing for me. We didn't declare bankruptcy. Don't worry, we figured it out. So, few promotions and some social media marketing, and that thing is running. So it's fine. Amen. Amen. We've got a great new hazy. No, I'm kidding. Second illustration, and I'm gonna, guys, I'm gonna keep you from dinner, but not for too much longer, because I want to get one more thing out. One more thing that I think was really practical for us. Two more things were practical. First, forgiveness. We'll go off the notes. How about that? And move quicker through it. God gives us a wonderful image of what it means to forgive on the cross. And it never quite hit me until 2017, and I'll get to that. So Melinda, and she gave me permission to share this. When Melinda and I first started dating, we are not alike. We're more alike now, but we were not alike. I had been a Christian, when I first met her, I had been a Christian, we met April 1st. Sorry, I'm looking at her. And I went 4 months before I became a Christian, knowing her. And so my faith was very new. We started dating that December, so I had known her for all of 7 months. We started dating that December, and we are getting into August, and so I've been a Christian right at the 1 year mark at this point. We start talking to her parents about getting married, because that's what Christians do. And they were concerned, and probably with good reason, they were concerned. Melinda comes from a Mennonite pacifist family. I come from a career Air Force family. I will say, yeah, there's some laughter there. Do you know the Mennonites? They're wonderful people. They are wonderful people. But there were some different mindsets there that had to come together. I will say she came from more money than my family came from. Thank you, BJ, for giving her a hug. She's listening to all this. There were a lot of differences that kind of had to be reconciled there. And I think Melinda and I figured that out in dating, but that was much harder with her folks. And we went months and months and months through very painful back and forth as to what this was going to be. And that hurt a lot. That hurt a lot for us, for me especially. So I didn't feel like I was getting a lot of grace or a lot of a chance there. You asked your father-in-law if you could marry his daughter, and this has gone on for 3 months, and you're going through, credit checks and all kinds of things to look at your stuff. This is just very deep and very emotionally wounding for me. This is the number one thing we argued about for the first 7 years of our marriage. The number one thing was whether or not that was appropriate, how it went, all of these things. And Melinda sat in a tug of war in all of that. And we were constantly trying to put things together and figure out next steps and how to move forward in this whole thing. And it was this constant wound that kept coming up and kept coming up for us. And we needed a way to move forward, not just with each other, but also with her folks. We needed healing there. We needed to figure out what the next steps were. And we had sat down with some peacemaking counselors. We had tried some different things on to figure out what next steps could possibly be. Not making a lot of progress, just a lot of lists at each other of how we'd wronged each other. Not really moving forward. We go to this conference in 2017, and there's this woman there that's speaking, and she was Rwandan, and she had a family of 13, 11 of which had been killed in that genocide by her neighbors. Because this is not just like other sides of town. Her neighbors, people she still interacted with, were responsible for murdering her family. And she's trying to figure out, as a Christian, how to move forward with this. And she's reading through the Gospels. And of course, she's read the Gospels numerous times before. And of course, I had read the Gospels numerous times. I had my MDiv by this point. So I've read the Gospels before. I know what forgiveness is. But she reads the Gospels, and she comes across Jesus on the cross. And he says this. He says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I had spent all of this time trying to articulate the level of pain and the detail of it and how much it's affected us and all the things that it had done to our marriage, how damaging it was. And yet Jesus on the cross says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," which meant that the forgiveness could come long before they fixed themselves. Do you get that? And it was like, oh, so maybe part of reconciling this relationship isn't figuring out all the nuances until her parents clean themselves up or we clean ourselves up and we become in a good spot and now we can come to forgiveness. But the forgiveness was the catalyst for being able to move forward. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Blew my mind. How many times I had read by that? Blew my mind. And we went back, we met with our folks, and that's exactly what we did. We put away our list, and we just said, hey, I'm going to have to do this numerous times, but I want to come to a place where I can forgive you. I do forgive you. And I'm going to choose to put aside my anger and put aside my wrath so that we have a foundation that we can move forward on. And I know that moved them. I could watch it move them in the room. That we could move forward and start that. And that Melinda and I, and even my behavior in responding to that pain and that hurt, that she and I could come to a place of forgiveness as well, without having all of that figured out. Forgiveness is the foundation upon which the relationship can finally rebuild and start healing. Don't withhold your forgiveness with one another. Seriously, take care of your foundation. Rebuild that. All right, last bit. When Alex and Josh and I were talking about, how do we pull all this together, marriage conference, these things, what do you want to do? One of the things we talked about was kind of being more practical with some of the things that we give you, that this is not just a high-level academic theological thing, even though we would all jam on that. We would all love that. But I wanted to leave you with something that's been really powerful in my marriage and powerful for healing. I won't go into the details of it too much, but suffice to say that in October of 2016, Melinda and I were sitting in a counseling office. We were not living in the same state. We had just finished our second spiritual abuse situation. We came very close to losing our house and getting it foreclosed in Portland. You can see money has always been great for us. It's wonderful. And then I went into ministry. But we were in a difficult spot. We were not communicating. We were trying to figure out what could you possibly do to move forward. And one of the keys that Justin, our counselor, helped us see was the importance of communication and being able to slow down and listen to one another. And that sounds real basic to some of you. It was not to us. And he gave us this acronym, and I'll fly through it really quick. It's a tool. It's called FANOS, F-A-N-O-S. If you have, you can pull out your phone if you want to write it down. If not, I'm not offended. But it's an acronym that stands for feeling, affirmation, need, ownership, and schedule. And the way that it works, you flip a coin to start, or you just lovingly decide to let your spouse start. And you walk through it, and one of them goes through on their own without being interrupted unless you invite them to interrupt you. This is how I'm feeling. These are the emotions that I'm feeling right now. I feel rejected. I feel whatever. When I experienced that, this is what I felt as it was going through me. Affirmation, something I see you doing right. I see you, the way that you're interacting with the kids, you have been so much more present of late. It's been so cool to watch those interactions and see you grow as a mom. You're a good mom. That would be a good affirmation. That's true of you too. And need. What do I need right now in the relationship? I need time with you. I need more than 15 minutes ships passing in the night right now. It's a busy season. I need us to prioritize getting time with one another. At least a half hour a night. Maybe that's your thing. This is what I need right now. O is ownership. This is something that I need to take responsibility for in our marriage right now, where I've recognized my own missteps, my own falling short in our marriage, and I need to own that and ask for forgiveness from you. This is something I could be improved. It may even be something you don't know about, but this is something I need to ask for forgiveness with. And then lastly is schedule. When am I willing to do this with you again? And man, we did it all the time. Are you correcting me? I couldn't tell if she was correct. She had her finger up no, I think he missed. No, I think it is schedule. You can tell me later if it's not, because it's really a one-way thing. But yeah, when am I willing to do this with you? And we did this several nights a week for a long time. I think the longest I ever went with it nonstop was 90 minutes on my own talk of this is really where I'm at. We've had it go 5 minutes as well. That's perfectly fine. But we just found that tool is so helpful, and then the other person goes back and does it the other way. But we just found that tool so helpful just to start conversations. And how many times I would hear things out of my wife that were just really just showing her heart and her intent for the marriage and for where we were going. And again, just promoted healing, promoted getting there. And I think you find when you as spouses can communicate well, and you're rooted in covenant, and you're offering forgiveness as foundation to move forward, and you're finally communicating, that you see how much you really do care for each other, even if you're pretty broken people, even if you're pretty messy. And that's okay, because sanctification, it's a process. It's a process. And growing your marriage is a process. Yeah, I think we want to eat pizza. I think that's what my conclusion says. but seriously, I mean, that's my prayer. Please, my prayer for you guys would be that you would think through how God loves you, the manner with which He does that, and that would cause you, when you realize the grace that's been spent on you and the free forgiveness that He gave you, that would help you work through and practically come to a place of reconciliation and healing in your marriage. With that, I don't remember, are you emceeing this? You can come MC it. Let them know where the pizza is. Let them know where the pizza lives.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for
Absolutely. Thank you,
sharing
Lisa.
and fighting for it for all of us to sit here and be encouraged by that, because I know that every one of us have walked through our fair share of conflict, and I get nervous just thinking about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, man, yeah, been there. I was just thinking, there's been a lot of talking, but I just was, as you talk about conflict, I was just thinking about how threatening it is and how scary it is to enter conflict. And something that Brian and I started saying really early on, well, not really, probably 5 or 6 years ago, was you mentioned conflict is the birthplace of creativity, but when we initially started going into conflict, it was so too scary to go into, because he was a threat to me, I was a threat to him. It feels risky, you're kind of standing on this precipice of do I have to fall to my own pride, or do I have to admit that I'm wrong, or do I have to stand my ground and then get butt heads and continue on in that. So just kept thinking gosh, I'm so thankful for the message that Jesus is gentle that we heard yesterday. And that's what He's calling us as we go into conflict. He's bringing us into intimacy with our spouse, and He's given us I just lost my word that I'm looking for, but He's given us, He showed us how to be gentle, and He tells us there's no condemnation, and we are in Christ Jesus, and so we can enter into conflict, and it's okay if you're wrong. It's okay. Our spouse really ends up being a mirror to us, showing us our weakest, most vulnerable places, and that is really hard to see, but it sharpens and shapes us. So yeah, Mark, thanks for sharing with us. I'm going to tell you about pizza now. Thank you for letting me share. And then I'm going to pray for us as we go. So we're going to head downstairs tonight, and you're going to just go all the way down the stairs into the large room. And there's a table in the center that has all the food on it, and we can go to either side of the table and then just find a seat. There are drinks. There's some leftover cookies and other desserts as well. After you've had your meal, just kidding, you can do dessert first, that's okay. Yeah, then we're just gonna enjoy time together. I encourage you guys to share stories. Remember, silly conflicts, funny things you can laugh about now, not in the moment. Be vulnerable with one another, yeah, and sit with people you don't know if you're up for it. Okay, I'm gonna pray for us. Heavenly Father, first of all, I want to lift up Mark and Melinda right now. I thank you for just the work that you have done in the, 13 years of marriage. What a gift that you gave them the strength to keep going. Thank you, Jesus. I pray that we would glean from that. And again, you would just bless our marriages as we receive tonight from Mark. God, I pray that the time that we have in a meal together is fruitful and is nourishing to our bodies and our souls and our minds as we connect with one another, break bread, pizza dough, all the things. God, we give thanks to you for this time. In your name, Jesus, amen. All right, down the stairs. Hey, can I say one thing really quick? We're going to try to get everyone back in here at 7:40, so we'll kind of flicker the lights or something. You'll know, okay?
was too fucking So, Rashmi, this is my fiance.
Rashmi.
She's been
It's a pleasure to meet you.
with me through situations that are not dissimilar from what you
Yeah.
just
Small business is done.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for that. I gotta get it.
Yeah, I love it. Yes, absolutely. Well, it's going okay.
Oh man, it's COVID. I don't know how close I am to that conversation.
Yeah.
I've been close before. I haven't actually had it yet, but I've been hovering around it.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is. But keep doing what I do.
Yeah, totally.
That's all we can do.
Get creative and keep cranking. So
Pretty much.
that's continue to work as well.
Monday I'm running down
Right.
the
This is, yeah.
Monday I'm running down the coast, try and get a giant order from a big company for a new invention. So it's never ending.
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, centered or? That's great. Yeah, I kind of like it. What's that? That is exactly it.
kill the house music, all right? You ready? All right, if you are outside of these doors, please come in. We're going to get started. It is 7:31. So we're in between 7:20, 7:40, just right. We're going to get going here in a few minutes. This is our last session together, and I'm very excited about this session. We've got three different people are going to be sharing during this time. We've got Josh's wife, not just Josh's wife, but to give it some context, Josh's wife, Courtney Searcy. She's going to be starting, yep. She's going to be kicking off session 4, and she's going to be speaking to enduring the long winter. And yeah, if you've been married for any amount of time, you may have experienced that, but so we're looking forward to that. And then just after Courtney teaches, we're going to hear from a couple from our church, Ben and Katie Lacey, and they're going to come up after Courtney speaks. And I have to look at this, but they're going to be speaking on, I'm just going to read this from here because it's kind of long, and it might feel awkward when I say it, but it's rekindle, enhance, and strengthen what has been or really could have been great. So they're going to be just speaking together. That wasn't awkward. I'm sorry that I said that. They're going to be speaking together. I know them really well, and I'm really looking forward to that. Cheers, guys. So they're going to come right up after Courtney, and they're going to share with us. And then we'll come up, and after that, you'll hear from me again, but we're going to do a Q&A. I'm watching them bring chairs in and get ready for people to come up. So even as you're listening, think of if there are questions that you have, things you've experienced, questions that are just like burning in your brain, there will be a time for that to come to. So I'd love to pray before we get started, before Courtney comes on up, and then I'll invite you up, Courtney. Father, I pray your words are spoken, and that you give each person coming up here tonight the confidence to look to you and to draw near to you first and foremost as they're sharing. And I thank you again for just everyone who shared willingness and vulnerability to be here. And we pray over this time that our hearts would be open to receive all that you have for us as individuals, as couples, and as people who long to know you and long to follow you. So we pray this in your name, Jesus, amen. All right, Courtney, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Can you guys hear me? All right. My name's Courtney Searcy. I'm married to Josh. We've been married almost 9 years, together 10 years. And I had this whole thing planned out because life is busy, right? And you want to be prepared. But then God last night shook it up like he do. And obedience is more important than convenience. So bear with me. And if this sounds scattered to you, that's between you and the Lord. So tonight I am speaking on enduring the long winter. And more specifically, what could determine a long winter. And you're probably thinking I was asked to speak on this because my marriage is really godly and awesome, because I'm married to a pastor, right? And I'm going to give you all my awesome tips and tricks, but that's wrong. I was asked to speak on this because we have endured a long winter. Our marriage was really, really hard for the first several years for a lot of different reasons. So I'm actually going to share with you all of my confessions and convictions, so settle in. And like Mark said, this is a disclaimer. If enduring a winter for you means you're suffering abuse, this is not directed towards you. Please seek help. It's not your fault. Paul David Tripp says your marriage doesn't exist in 3 to 4 big moments, but it's set in 10,000 little moments. What he means by that is if God doesn't rule your mundane, he doesn't rule you, because that's where you live. You don't live in those 3 to 4 big moments. You live in the everyday 10,000 little moments. And I wish I would have been told that when I got married. We were told, marriage isn't hard, life is hard. And I'm like, no, marriage is hard, right? Life is hard, marriage is also hard. But that sounds obvious, right? It's not 3 to 4 big moments, but it feels like it. And I bet you guys are thinking about those little moments right now, right? Those big moments, that one thing that your spouse did, that 1 or 2 things that you did coming to your mind right now. When I think of that phrase that Paul David Tripp said, and I look back at my own marriage and the ways that I viewed and handled that cold season of winter, I think about the book of Jonah. And when you first read Jonah, it feels like you're walking into a movie right in the middle of it. He's already fleeing from God, and you're like, wait, what did I miss? So you're thinking maybe Jonah's hardships are based on several big moments, right? Maybe the storm on the ship, maybe being swallowed by a giant fish, that withering plant. And I could easily say the hardships of my marriage were based on several big moments as well. Severe family dysfunction, tragic loss and deep grief, being diagnosed with complex trauma. And then let's throw a kid or 2 in there, right? Sounds great. Especially one who never sleeps. And yes, those are significant, and those things matter, and those big moments of your life, they matter, and they require care and patience and compassion and counsel. But 10,000 little moments, what does that mean? And so I will give you an example. Hours ago, I noticed that the toilet paper roll was empty. And I usually don't like marriage jokes like that because it feels pretty trivial, but let's follow this rabbit trail, okay? He forgot to replace the toilet paper again. I had to do it again. You know what? I actually did the dishes again. You know what? I actually changed Milo's diaper again. Man, Josh doesn't do anything. Man, I do everything. Josh is really selfish. He doesn't really care about me, does he? I'm not doing anything for him then. He doesn't deserve it. And that's not true, right? That's not true of him. And that toilet paper joke's not so funny anymore, right? But that's those 10,000 little thoughts throughout the day, right? That add up and add up and add up. And those thoughts took a second. And maybe those are habitual. And maybe those things pile on. And maybe those things are ruling your mundane. Those 10,000 little, cold, sinful thoughts being indulged, keeping you in the winter. And sometimes we can't change our circumstances, right? Those big moments. Sometimes we're not in control of that. Sometimes that's not your sin, and sometimes that's sin done to you. And I couldn't change my circumstances. I couldn't change that my addict father caused so much destruction to our family. And I couldn't change the fact that my mentor's husband, who was actually the man who showed me what it was to be a father, was dying of cancer. And I couldn't change my childhood and everything that came with it that led to my diagnosis of complex trauma, all within the first couple of years of our marriage. I couldn't change those things. And those things are what I thought defined the hardships of my marriage. But like Jonah, it was those 10,000 little unchecked, unrepented sins of being ruled by those circumstances and not God's promises. A self-centered perspective and judgment on my spouse. Grief over my comforts, but no concern for the comforts of my husband. My own sense of justice. Self-pity. Anger and resentment. And blame. Just like Jonah, right? Not my fault, not my problem. And in chapter 4, it shows us that Jonah actually had a theologically correct view of God when he quotes Exodus 34. He said, I knew that you were a good and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, who relents concerning calamity. Because Jonah experienced that from God, right? And we've all experienced that from God. We've experienced his compassion and his steadfast love. We go to church. We're in community. We're doing all the church things, right? But Jonah was also quick to notice when things didn't happen according to his plan. And Jonah liked God's grace under his own circumstances, but not when it was extended. And Jonah got angry when things didn't go his way. And Jonah and God's desires often collided. So do you see how these little thoughts can start to rule your mundane over and over and over? Do you see how these things can keep you in the cold of winter? And I know it doesn't look like that every day. It's not like big drag-out fights and things like that, or maybe it is, but these little thoughts over time, being indulged for seconds at a time, they build and build and build. And if you're thinking about finding me after this to suggest therapy, don't worry, I'm like 10 steps ahead of you. So, with the help of my counselor, I had to really work on this. I had to process the unprocessed hurt and grief of those big moments, right? But I had to discern those little 10,000 moments that was actually being sown into my marriage and what was keeping us in the cold of winter. And so again, those big moments are big moments and they are significant, but that is not what was keeping us where we were at. And so when I started to work on that and discerning the lies and what I was believing about God and what I was believing about my marriage, confessing that, repenting, and asking for forgiveness is when my heart started to thaw out. And thankfully, because change is an act of grace, we have seen a lot of spring and summer over the last few years. But also, like Jonah, we have a choice. So we can say yes to God, who is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, and abundant in loving kindness, who relents concerning calamity, or no, and sit in your thwarted desires. And that might be what determines how you endure the winter.
Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, I'd just like to invite Ben and Katie up. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who organized this. It's been really fun and powerful for me, and especially the speakers. Man, it's been great to hear different perspectives. And Courtney, thank you for sharing from your heart. That was amazing. One thing, we did not write the title of this, so I don't know who did, and we're getting a. But it is a good title, so whoever wrote it, I'm not throwing shade at that. But okay. But so Katie was asked to speak, and I'll kind of let you take it.
Hi, I'm Katie. Yeah, Mark, wherever Mark is, yeah, Mark had reached out a couple weeks ago about speaking, and I kind of made an audible back and proposed having both of us speak, just to hear from a married couple, not that like we have it all figured out or anything, but I just think there's value in hearing from both. Much like Josh and Courtney, like it was really powerful to hear from each of you. I know it wasn't together, but like I have a much fuller picture of just some of the seasons and struggles and things that you guys have worked through. So thank you for being vulnerable. I similarly have just been like so fed, and like my bucket has just been really filled the last 2 nights just from everybody contributing and showing up. Ben and I just had dinner with Parker and Colleen and Zach and Rachel, I don't know where you guys are, and Kyle from Icon Church, and it's a joy to just get to come together and be together in community. And Alex and Mark, and Lisa, like we talk a lot about, not doing, religion or faith individually, and it's cool to get to do that with another church. So Icon, thank you for coming, and thank you for participating in Redemption people, it's always fun to see you guys too. So that being said, I'm Katie, Ben, and we have 4 daughters, Eva, Vivian, Daphne, and Bianca. They are at home right now. Our oldest is 13. We have 10-year-old twins, and we have a 9-year-old and a golden retriever. And we have been a part of Redemption since the start, and I feel like the sanctification of our lives has been so powerful and rich, and I like looking back at my notes of like where we've started to where we are and hopefully like where we go, it's just like, holy moly. So we met when we were 19 and got married 22 and a month shy of 22. We went to college across the country from each other and dated long distance. We were both athletes in college and by nature just pretty competitive people, which we brought into our marriage, which you will probably hear some more about. We each grew up in strong Christian families and loving homes. When we got married, I remember there was each, like, 2 distinct memories that I have of each of our dads. One was your dad at our rehearsal dinner. He, Ben grew up in a baseball, softball family, and his dad had a baseball, and he was, using, like, baseball metaphors or imagery, and I'll never forget him, like, holding that baseball and, like, looking me in the eye and just saying, Katie, Ben will always be loyal to you. And he is, like, tearing up, and I was like, whoa, my father-in-law is, like, looking at me, like, crying, and he's telling me his son's loyal. And, like, that was, like, really powerful. And then the next day, I walked down the aisle with my dad, and before we, like, turned the corner into the sanctuary, he looked me in my eye, and he said, Katie Cakers, I have dreamt of this day your entire life. And, most dads, this is a really hard day for them to, like, give your only daughter away. But he's like, I am so excited. I love Benihana so much. And I can't be more proud of, like, the life that you're, about to begin. And so that, like, that's like kind of where we have come from and, like, where we started marriage. So fast forward, we're getting back from, the honeymoon, and I've got a 5th year of college down at George Fox, and Ben's working full time. And I realized, Josh, your remarks about marriage last night, you said, it took like maybe 20 seconds to realize, like, like what, I don't know how you described it, like how bad of a person or a spouse you were. Well, unfortunately, Ben and I had a very different experience because we both thought we entered the marriage like pretty like A games and like our shit didn't stink type of, like, that's kind of how we like approached it. It was like just a lot of pride, a lot of selfishness, like, how great are we, and like how lousy the other person's being. So like looking back on that first year, it was like kind of level 1 of like Super Mario Brothers or like whatever your favorite video game is. Like, I mean, all things considered now, like it was pretty easy year. And yet, like, man, we fought like hard, and we were like both so prideful. We were just competitive. We weren't servant-minded. Like, for example, I would come home, here's my day. Like, I had 1 class, and I had a part-time job, and I played basketball 3 hours a day. That was, as an athlete at the time. And Ben would, he worked 8 to 5 in Portland, and I'd get home from practice, and I'm thinking, okay, what did Ben make me for dinner? And he's on the couch, he's got the ball game going and like his bag of Doritos, and like we're both just like looking at each other like, well, who's cooking dinner? And then like, I like go into the laundry to like, think that I'm going to pull out my clean like uniform for tomorrow. And there's just like a pile of dirty laundry. And it's like, well, who's doing the laundry, and just like basic things. But that's kind of where we started, and just like some of kind of the place that we had to work through. So I'm going to hand it over.
Yeah. So I think, either way, whether you're confronted with your sin right away or not for a long time, at some point you will be convicted, and we'll talk about that, like who and how and what. One verse that's quoted a lot of times when you're not quite sure what path you're going to be on is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. So trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths or direct your paths. And I was just talking with some of my friends recently about how this verse or these types of verses can be very prescriptive, and like, do this and then that will happen. And the Proverbs can sometimes be read as that. And so I think as a young married couple at age 22 by this point, it's kind of like that. We were like, well, we'll figure this out. We'll, if we just work harder at it, things will get easier. We'll solve these problems because, we got this, right? And I think, we are both grinders. So like some people are in athletics, some people are very physically gifted, but neither one of us really was. We really built ourselves into a successful athlete. And kind of, I'm from the Midwest, as is Katie, and many of you know about the Midwestern work ethic. It's a true religion. It's like the harder you work, the more you will get out of it. And if you didn't get a good outcome, it's all on you because you didn't do it, right? And so I think we brought that into our marriage, that Midwestern work ethic, that's saying if we just grind it out, if we just work harder at this, try harder, and maybe not me try harder, maybe it's her that needs to try harder. So, we wouldn't say that. Like, we would probably.
But that's the 10,000.
Yeah, those little moments, right?
Courtney was talking about. Yeah.
And so then, we graduated from college. We kind of defined, we worked through gender roles in our relationship. Katie's family had a very interesting view of gender roles in that, they were very egalitarian in their faith and how church should work, but had a very structured roles at home. And my parents are as conservative as they come. And so that's kind of how we operated out of that. We had a great first year of figuring this out together, but we were surrounded by family and friends in an environment that we could fail, really. And then I got into medical school, and we moved back to Iowa City, and we knew one person basically in the city. We were dual income, no kids people. And through medical school, even though it was hard, and residency, it was pretty nice. We had flexibility, time. I did have some structure, but Katie, you could do things that you wanted to do. I could do things that I wanted to do. But we started building this kind of competition in whose job is more important. So as it developed, like I'm in medical school, so Katie has to subsume her desires and career and move back to Iowa. She wanted to be in fashion merchandising for like Adidas or Nike, and guess what? They're in Portland and not in Iowa City. And so there was a lot of back and forth that we had to work through. And then I think, as those of you who are parents know very well, when you have your first kid, that changes a lot. So those roles become even more in stark relief, and you have to really work through that. So we had one child. She was a couple years old. I started my attending physician job, my new big boy job after all this training, and we started getting involved in a church. And kind of an interesting story. At the end of this community group that we had been a part of and then led, we were kind of going around the circle, and one of the families said, "We remember you when you only had one kid, and you guys, we didn't really like you." They're like, "You guys thought you had it all figured out. It was so easy for Ben and Katie and Eva, And then they said they went on to try, it was like a backhanded compliment, right? It was like, but you've grown or whatever, you know. But all I heard was the, you know, we didn't really like you part, right? And then, so, you know, our lives together, but also just in general, have been in 4-year chunks. So 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, and 4 years of having 4 kids right after that. And then after that, what happens? You don't have the 4-year block, right? Then you're in real life. You're all grown up. And that competition that we had started to develop of whose job is harder or whose job is more important or whose job is worse. Or, you know, I mean, whatever the day was, it kind of varied in the context.
Well, fast forward to 2017, and I win that competition. My job is harder, and I had a nervous breakdown to prove it. So, there you go. So yes, 4 kids in 4 years. That'll like bring you to your knees. That is exactly what we needed, and that's not what we planned, but that's what we needed. And you know, 5 years out, I can say, like, by God's grace, I had a nervous breakdown, which feels like really weird and funny to say, but like, man. I feel like we like each other so much more when we have just been like brought to our knees and like seeing the need that we have for humility before the Lord and one another and before our community. So yeah, we ended up in therapy, and it became a weekly rhythm, which we call #Therapy Thursday. So as you can imagine, therapy is on Thursdays. And yeah, everybody knows in our community, don't try to make plans with the Lacey's on Thursday nights because they'll be in therapy. You know, initially we like wanted some help just having a framework for parenting, and we just quickly realized that we just needed a framework for ourselves and our relationship. So, you know, weekly, we would just sit down with our therapist, and she would try to understand our story and our background and our families of origin. And she didn't know this, but every week we would leave therapy, and we would decide who won therapy.
So yeah, we Therapy Thursday was also a date night. So it was like there were a few really awkward dates. Like I remember we were in front of like the bar at Westward. And we like didn't talk to each other. we just had like 3 cocktails apiece and just like were angry at each other. But I think she won most of the therapy.
So that, I mean, there you go. Like you can't, like we are, yeah, like we just even competed in therapy. But again, by God's grace and like a really good therapist, we like slowly learned how to build out our toolkit, and a lot of, you know, Mark, you know, your FANOS acronym, fabulous. And I think similarly, we really had to learn how to listen. And I think it was you that said like, that sounds really simple, or maybe Courtney did, but we like kind of learned that we didn't really know how to listen to each other. And Gina, our therapist, would demonstrate to us active listening. So, you know, we'd come in with a conflict, and she'd hear from one person. And then before the next person would share, that person would have to repeat back exactly like how they heard their experience being represented. And that's hard because you want to, it's not the time to like inflect your own opinion on what happened. You're just telling the other person what you heard them say and how they felt that. And that's a really valuable skill because it shows humility. It shows a posture of listening. And we didn't have that. And I think having a therapist demonstrate that to us as we each are sharing with her, our experiences in the same situation, and for her to demonstrate that and then have us do that, it showed me just like the value of like how to be empathetic and how to listen and understand that like we can have the same experience happening, but like two very different experiences in it. And that's just like, for me, allowed, like I don't always respond well in the moment, but it's allowed me space to like, for the Holy Spirit to just kind of work in my heart by like understanding like, okay, I don't understand, like work with me here, Holy Spirit, and like show me that, and Gina like says that there's room for both of us. And that was like really huge for me. And so eventually like the competing became to like, our word has been same team. Like we need to be on the same team. And that's kind of where we've
Yeah. And also, it's at the same time a parallel path of, growing on our faith and serving in the church and building community. And I think, therapy has really taught us a lot, but it's augmented the things that the Holy Spirit is doing in our lives. Gina, our therapist, she values our individual stories, so we're not competing. Our stories are both valid. She also taught us to check our assumptions, which is something, you office space lovers. I have a mat, a jump to a conclusion mat, right? Right. Sorry, that's you guys probably don't even remember that movie, but check our assumptions. We have to do that every single day. You have to say, like you said, repeat back what you heard. And we also learned a lot. And those of you I know we have quite a few people who are counselors here or in training to be counselors. And understanding the family of origin and how even just how you deal with conflict or your story, how much it impacts how we interact with each other as spouses, how we think and process, how we respond to each other. Another thing that I'll let Katie talk about is grief and loss. So that is inevitable in all of our lives is experiencing grief and loss. And I think. And I'll share a little bit later, like it's surprising to me how often it shows up and when it shows up and how like kind of out of my expected time frame it shows up. So back to our verse, our conundrum of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. So trust in the Lord with all your heart. I mean, when you're in a marriage, what does that mean as a married couple to trust in the Lord with all your heart? That was something that we really struggled with when we were younger.
For me, praying in faith has just like led me to trust in the Lord. And I wouldn't say that like my prayers in faith, like I've been shown like over years and decades, like how like learning how to trust in the Lord, like by praying in faith. I'm going to give two examples. For you, when we were first married, just like praying for you to grow in faith and godly wisdom. And, eventually like that looked like a lot of things, but eventually like you became a pastor. And like that wasn't in my plan, like my plan book for you to become a pastor. And I was like, whoa, God answered that in a way that like I didn't really imagine him to do that. But it's like being open to just like how God is going to answer those prayers is again like just showing up in a place of humility. And the other notable prayer of faith that I just remember praying over and over when the girls were really little was, God, I just pray for like these women to just grow up strong and confident and like just have, intelligent, compassionate minds, like that they can think for themselves and that they can be just let them be strong and capable. And then like, I mean, if you know our girls, like I stopped praying that prayer like pretty early on because I'm just like, okay, you're answering that in spades. Like they're strong and capable, a little bit too much. So let's back that up a little bit. But it's like, again, that praying in faith and just like trusting that, like that's like what it meant for me to trust in the Lord is like, he is gonna be there. And, you know, a lot of the songs we sang tonight, Daniel, thank you or Kyle and Daniel, thank you for picking those because they really like got to the heart of that for me.
And the second question, you know, what does it mean to lean not on our own understanding? When you're 22, like that's all you got, basically. You know, that's how you forge ahead. And so one thing that I've learned over the last 22 years is, you know, grace over grit. That grittiness that got me so far is not the answer. Jesus, as we heard last night, his gentleness and his loving kindness, that's what preserves our marriage and also our relationship with him. One thing that I think is a gift from Jesus' gentleness is learning that Katie's pain or pleasure or even her mood is not my responsibility. It's not my fault, or it's not my, you know, when she's doing great, it's not because of me either. Like it just is, and it's something that I, as somebody who's very much a caregiver, I feel that. Like I think that it's my responsibility how she's doing. The other thing is that we have to trust that what we tell each other is true. So that's part of the checking assumptions. That's part of the running back what the other person said, because what you say in marriage has to be true. Not on our own understanding also, so our own understanding does not include our community. So that includes being known by your community, practicing hospitality and generosity of both your time and your talents. That's serving together. All of that is like not leaning on your own understanding. Getting out of our own heads. Things that we've really prioritized are spending quality time together despite busy lives. You know, we both are committed to a lot of things, and we have 4 kids and a dog. And so it's really important. Another thing, you know, when other couples ask us, like, I think it's really one of the best gifts that we've been given is common interests, and we've really actually fostered that from the very beginning. We've pursued those common interests. Right now, it's you know, boating, which is breaking out another 1,000 for our boat, but also whiskey and traveling and like things that we enjoy together. That is really cool to be able to share together. Another thing is prioritizing physical intimacy. And after being married for 22 years. Very early on, we realized our schedules don't line up, and Katie has this comment about early evening is kind of, that's her. You would think that I would figure that out, but I still think that I'm going to turn her into a night owl, and it doesn't work that way. She's like conked out, right? So I think physical intimacy is important. It's a big part of being friends. I like the book. I think it was Intimate Allies, was that one of the books on the resources? That's a really cool concept. I haven't read that book, but the intimacy that you get from physical intimacy, sharing common interests, and then just getting out of your own heads, so talking to each other. Those are really, really part of that grace over grit that we've seen in our lives. Another thing, the end of that verse is, he will make straight your paths or direct your paths. I think that is, to me, the classic thing for me is like, I think I know what the path is, right? I know what the straight path is here. I see this plus this equals this. And I think that is something that I feel every single time it doesn't go the way I planned. So unmet expectations. We read a book as a church a few years ago called Shattered Dreams. Some of you may have read that. That's what that book is getting at. It's like, what happens when things don't go how you plan? And so, this isn't easy. Like, this is a lot of hard work, but also grace from him. And that idea of making straight your paths does not mean it's a straight path to glory.
Yeah, and lastly, for me, it just means practicing a lot of acceptance. Like, anybody who's been in therapy has learned that tool, and that's just like a daily tool of just like owning my own stuff, and just being able to like let go of the things that are out of my control. For instance, our kids are still not in school because there's a teacher strike happening, and that's really hard. But just like accepting that and not letting that just like totally ruin me. Whereas I think in the past, it would have been easier for that to ruin me and then ruin like when you get home from work and I'm just like, in a bad mood and I'm going to take it out on you. And then, yeah, similar to like what you were saying, I just think for me, like building in downtime with one another is huge. And that's something like even for this, like we had to build in downtime to just really connect on this and to just like get on the same page. And whether it's, therapy is a nice rhythm, but just like having time to sync. And then lastly, I wrote down being known in community. Community is just like so huge for us, and just I think obviously for our church, and I would imagine Icon for your church too. And in closing, just I've just been so encouraged by this weekend and just being in community in this context with all of you. So thank you, pastors and staff, for facilitating this, because it's just like really, it's just been a huge encouragement to us, and just getting to meet some new friends tonight from Icon. So thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna invite all of the teachers up. We're gonna do a time of Q&A right now. So we're gonna just pull some chairs up. Mark's gonna come, if Courtney and Josh wanna come up, and Alex. And then I'm gonna run the mic like this. So if you have a question, I'm gonna just move around the room. If you do have a question, I'll come to you, and I think these guys are gonna have a mic. So give us just a second, think of your questions, and just raise your hand if you want to ask something. What's that? Thanks, you guys. Oh, you got a question? Okay, can I say really quick too, we've got people online, so if you're online and you have a question, you can text it in. Dan, is that right? Help me. On the chat. So go ahead and put it in and we'll get it up here too. All right, Justin.
So this is a question directed predominantly towards the Lacey's, but the rest of you can interject too. For example, and I'll use Ben just to describe this easier. Since you're both competitive, say that you're feeling that Katie is being overly competitive. How do you gracefully, tactfully, but also being assertive, let her know? And could you provide an example?
Well, I will say the competitiveness has morphed into almost it's an inside joke at this point. And so, but it wasn't always an inside joke. And so I think we had to learn that, we are on the same team and we're here for each other. So like the competitiveness of my family does it this way versus your family does it that way, or, even like, I don't know, repetitive arguments because of those sorts of things. Family versus family seems to be a pretty common one. We really had to step back and just remind ourselves that, hey, we're a family too, and we're on the same team. And it was an actual timeout, separate yourself from that argument. I can't remember any specifics, but maybe you can.
I think, yeah, with that, so Gina, our therapist, I love how she just encourages us to diffuse situations with humor, and not to avoid but just to diffuse. And so she's even encouraged us. She's like, just come up with a word or a safe word or whatever. And so for us, same team is that word. And so I mean, I can think of just like a few weeks ago in the kitchen, we were getting kind of hot over some topic, cleaning up the kitchen, and I was like really like coming after you, and you were just like, dude, same team. And it just like hearing that, like I was like, oh yeah, okay, yes. That, and like that, it was just like a loving like way that, again, Mark, maybe it was you or you guys have talked about like planning for those times. Like that's kind of our way of planning for like, how are we going to diffuse this? And it was, that word, it triggers like, okay, take a pause. We are on the same team. Let's take a breath and revisit this when I'm less impassioned.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything to speak to that? Speak now, yeah. What'd you say, Mark?
They did one.
They did great. They did great. Okay. Evan's got something.
Hey guys, on the topic of kids and marriage, Natalie and I do not have kids. We hope to have kids one day. In the scenario of fundamentally disagreeing on a fundamentally important decision for your children, whether it comes out very badly, like the disagreement comes out very badly, or well, what's some advice you might have for some of us on how to, for the sake of the marriage, not absolutely destroy one another when it comes to how to raise a kid or a decision or a moment? Would love some insight on that.
I mean, your kids are the oldest, right? So let's start there. I don't know. I think I don't think it necessarily has to pertain to parenting. There's any number of decisions that you guys are going to make as a couple that maybe don't necessarily rise to the level of parenthood or how you're going to steer through some. I guess I'll say with parenting, just to speak to that, and maybe then I'll get to the decision piece. You learn on the fly everything you're going to know about parenting. You are going to bring in ideas from your family of origin as to how to approach something. But if you know Jeremiah and you know Luke, 10 and 7, radically different people. They're so incredibly different. The way we have to approach parenting them, we love them equally. Our approach is wildly different. And is on the fly figuring out how best to address things, how best to communicate with them in ways that they can hear and listen and grow and ideally flourish and thrive. We talk about that often as to what we're seeing, what we're observing, what we're coming back to figure out how best to parent those kids. Jeremiah's easy, let's be honest. We talk about Luke a lot and how best we can work through that. I think when it comes to decision making, just in general, like whether it's moving between cities or anything like that, I know for Melinda and I, it was a huge decision we moved down to Portland intending to stay in Portland. We moved back 2.5 years later, and the decision to move away from her parents and move towards mine, that was a long drawn out discussion. I don't think we did that well. We've had to learn how to communicate more effectively from that and get our ideas out. And be able to express them with each other and have grace with each other. You may not have all the vocabulary to express what it is you're trying to get across, but having grace with one another to, like, you should want Natalie to be able to communicate well with you, and vice versa. You're encouraging them. You're trying to pull that out of them so that their feelings are heard, that they feel understood and listened to, so that you guys can objectively make a decision from there. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I suppose that applies to kids too. Now you got ideas.
I had to think, yeah.
That's good. I love it.
I think for Jana and I, we tend to really agree most on just about everything when it comes to like how to raise kids and like soccer practice and who's going where and schedule it. That's usually never a thing, really. So I don't know what that'll look like. But Tove's about to turn 13, and maybe we'll figure it out, and I'll have something next year for you. But I can say that one thing that's been so helpful is that Jana feels empowered enough to call me out where I'm being too bullheaded or stubborn or short or impatient, and not recognizing that about myself in the moment. Like, I will use a word that isn't appropriate, not like swearing at the children or something, but like I'll use a word that fits the situation, but it's too on the nose. And Jana has no problem saying, hold on, Tove. And she'll address Tove and me at the same time. Dad needs to think about what he just said. And I'll be like, I said what I meant. She's like, we know. You're very good with your words. You picked that word, didn't you? So me and Dad are gonna go down the hall and we're gonna talk about this. And I'm like, oh man, here we go. And we'll go back to the bedroom or something for a moment. And Jana will have no problem going, babe, the word you used was right. Yes. But there was so much shame baked into that word. Do you think that? I'm like, yeah, I do feel that. And so I'll have to say sorry to Jana. I'm sorry, you're right. Okay, and now we're on the same page, and then I can go back down the hall, back to Tove. Hey, and then have to just say, hey, the word I just used was way too on the nose. And there was a lot of shame baked in that, and I don't want you to feel shame. I'm sorry. Here's what I need to say, and here's where the correction needs to come in. But I don't want you to hear what I said 5 minutes ago. That's not right. Let me run that back and try again. Here's what I want to say, and Mom helped me come to this. So, that's not a direct conflict on I want to raise the kids this way and Jana wants to raise them that way, but that is a way that I've noticed in the last couple of years that's been really helpful. I guess that is a way of raising kids. I get disciplined, so to speak, having hard conversations, but yeah, Jana's been helpful with tempering my language of throttle back a little bit.
So they answered your question, but I'm going to answer a different part of your question. I couldn't help but pick up on the tone of the question, which was monumental, huge. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but raising kids is important. The things that you think are important right now are probably going to change. You want to know how we have an awesome 5-year-old daughter who is really funny and really creative? Screen time. Yeah. And we didn't plan on that. We were the family who was like, oh, they're never going to see a device until they're 13 and things like that. And or eating, we want to take care of our kids, but also it's like, man, my daughter has had a lot of goldfish today. Those are important things, and you think that those are just incredibly monumental. And I'm not taking away from the importance of those things. We're having to work through that with some, Margot will be going to school next year, so she's going to do homeschool, public school, private school, things that Seattle parents have to really think through intentionally. That's a really important decision. But I just almost want to kind of relieve you of you don't, it's going to be okay. The things that you think are absolutely monumental and life-changing, it's important to pay attention to those, but also I've just found your kid's going to be all right, Whenever we first had Margot, I was a wreck of anxiety for that first year, just could not get out of my head. All kinds of tragedies and potential tragedies, and her mentor at the time just kind of, what did she say? Should I say how she said it? No, I'm not going to say how she said it.
Come on. Come on.
Okay. I'm going to say it. I was worried about, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I was worried about all kinds of things, and she basically just explained to me how long the human race has been alive, and that kids are actually really resilient and durable, if you can't pick up on where she maybe. So yeah, all that to say, the things that you think are really important and life-changing, man, don't fight about those right now, because at some point you might see like, I'm not as passionate about this as I thought I would have been, and this isn't as monumental as I made it up in my mind.
Thanks, you guys. Oh, yeah, go.
Sorry.
Okay,
I
no.
just, with those questions too, would just encourage if you don't have kids, and I'm not saying you guys are doing this, but, and you want them, don't have those hypothetical what ifs right now. Like, just throw those out the window. Don't have a hypothetical, like, well, if this happened, like, what, we should do this, because that hasn't happened, you know? And why do you have, like, even if you are a parent now, why do you have that perspective? And where is that rooted in? So why do you think you're right in this situation? Is that because you want to do opposite of what your parents did? That might need to be looked into in your own heart. Or like parenting out of fear because you don't want to be like your mom, or you don't want to be like your dad, or asking those questions like, why do I think I'm right in this for this other soul? So yeah, just making sure that you're not projecting your own hurts or pride or anything like that onto another being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, you guys. Do you guys mind if I add one thing to that? Just like from each, knowing now some of your guys' stories, I think the thing that I've heard from each of you is also like, ask for help. And I just like want to say, like, when you hit those moments, like, I know, I don't know you guys as well, but I know all of these people are like, I've been in therapy, I talked to my friends, I did, like, you have to ask, and that is actually vulnerable, and that first step changes you, it changes your heart. It like, it opens you up to receive help and to be willing. So I think for all of us, I'm just like, man, I gotta ask. Yeah.
One thing I will say is like, with the branch of evangelicalism that we have here, I think we're missing out a lot on having people ahead of you. So, like we're in the top, 10% of age of our church, right? We're in our mid-40s. But it's really cool to start seeing some people that have more experience than we do and can give that wisdom. So for those of you thinking about having kids someday, or, get to know some families that have kids and like ask those questions that you might have and share your complicated, multi-faceted argument that you've had for the last 3 years, and I don't think that those of us who have kids would diminish your questions. We would actually just flesh them out a little bit. So I know that I make a point to talk to Bob. He's our lone octogenarian at our church every week, because I'm like, I just want to talk to you, man. And it's really cool. So as our churches mature, I really hope that that we'll have that opportunity to serve each other, in different seasons of our life.
Okay, more questions? Yes, okay. Go, you know what, you do that.
Say it again. Sorry, say it again.
Do you want the microphone? Just joking. I'll just bring this up.
I'll share. We had a trip this summer, and we dropped off our kids at the airport. Katie dropped them off, and they flew to Grandma's house by themselves, and then we went somewhere else, and it was awesome. So that would be one thing. So I think, but I think that the leveling up. I think you said first level of Super Mario Brothers, but leveling up is really cool. Like when you And when you can name it and you can like show your gratitude for it, not just like assume, oh yeah, like my kids are 13, they should be able to do this, right? But when you actually name what they can do and thank them for doing that, and like then we can like share a new experience with each other. I mean, that is cool. So there's several, I can think back several different levels that we've been able to level up in the last 22 years. But that is cool in marriage. Like when you work through something really hard, when you have a new opportunity at work or that you can celebrate together, when you go on a trip together, when your kids get to a new age, like I said. I think that, to me, that's like my favorite part of marriage.
I'm going to piggyback off of that. That's an awesome example. And I think for us, that trip represented a lot of, Courtney, what you were talking about in the 10,000 daily mundane things. And I think I had a little bit different perspective on that for myself. And like for me, sometimes as a stay-at-home mom and a homemaker, sometimes you can die to the 10,000 daily mundane things of like the laundry, the dishes, the menus, the fights, the everything. And Ben and I, like shortly after our fourth came along, like we needed something fun to be able to share together and at home because, you know, we don't get out that much with 4 kids at that age. And so we like discovered whiskey was kind of our thing. And a British friend of ours, he told me when I told him that we ended up going to Scotland. That was our trip. And when I told him we were going over there, he looked at me in his British accent and he's like, Scotch heals. Amen, brother. Like it does. It did. Like it has healed us in like so many ways of just like, oh man, just like having something to look forward to, like at the end of the night or the middle of the day. I mean, let's be honest. like whatever. But like seriously, so I mean, that trip of like getting to that point of like getting to put our kids on a plane so that we could go to Scotland and like celebrate something that like really saw us through some dark days and that like we've shared together and has just been like such an amazing like experience in the day to day, and then have like that big adventure was just, it was really cool. So
my favorite aspect of our marriage has just been learning to love someone and enjoy someone and like someone who is completely different than me. So when Courtney and I went through premarital counseling, we took a compatibility test and got like a 32%. Yeah, it was really bad. Where it was like, slow the brakes on this. And honestly, not that it doesn't matter, but to anyone who's single here, I kind of think compatibility is a lie. Like the ability to really have someone who's completely unlike you, and then over the years grow to admire the ways that they're different than you, and kind of become similar. Like we're both wearing black and we both have nose rings. So we've come together, you know, one flesh. But yeah, just the ability to not marry, for me to not marry the female version of me, you know, but to actually love someone who's completely different has been really enjoyable. Very difficult, but now really sweet.
This, for my friends, will sound like, yeah, there you go, Alex, I guess. Until about 7 years ago, I think the only way I would be able to identify fun or things I've enjoyed with Jana would be very generic sounding. Because I was so ill-equipped to become a husband or a pastor. In fact, I told our staff this week, I don't think I became a pastor until about 6 or 7 years ago. I did lots of ministry and did things, but I wasn't a pastor yet. And in many ways, I don't think I was ready to be a husband either. I was a husband. I provided, I did my job, I showed up, and things like that. And things were peaceable and good by all kind of traditional standards. So the things I've begun to enjoy and can say like from my actual soul, my actual self, is I've begun to enjoy mundane things. Like just normal life together. I think when I do 100% of the cooking in our home. That's by, and it's by, well, we gotta survive. But like I like cooking for Janet. I like spending time with her just on normal days. And so I think the highlight reel is beginning to become just more like, well, what did we do yesterday? It's kind of like, that was good. Like we got in a fight and we worked it out. And it was a fight that years ago would have taken 2 days to figure out or whatever, you know what I mean? But we just were able to go like, oh, I'm doing that thing again, aren't I? I'm sorry, hold on, give me 5 minutes. I'm just gonna take a walk and, all right. And we got back on the same page. It's like those kinds of, that's the way I would like to start articulating what I'm enjoying about having been together for 22 years and married for 18 is, it's kind of settled into just the ordinary stuff is what I think I would say that I enjoy a lot. Though I love to go to Scotland too and party and like the highlight stuff for sure. Yes, that stuff, yes, is awesome. But an honest soul answer is more kind of how was yesterday? And that's what I've actually begun to enjoy through a lot of therapy, blah, 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 all the things that we've all mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no order. Well, it's what your favorite thing about your marriage. No, kidding. You don't have to go. Bellingham and fried pickles. That's probably where I would start. No, seriously. I think like my favorite parts have been watching. Well, I'll say my part with Melinda has been watching her flourish and really come into the different roles that we've entered into. Queen Anne, 2 in the morning with a blowout diaper. She's embarrassed. But just a great memory of just watching her as a mom really come into that role and just dominate and just systematically take that kid and clean that kid in the middle of the night in a space that we should not have been. We were exhausted. Those of you who have children, heads up. Those of you who have children, you're tired all the time, and it's like 2 in the morning at the blowout. This stinks. It's everything that should not work out. And just watching her step into that role and thrive and flourish, and just go, wow. You just get those images of who they're becoming and who they're growing into being, and there's lots of those. There's lots of those, and so that's probably my favorite, other than Bellingham with the fried pickles.
It's funny, so I say this because it's true, and I don't want to be insensitive to those who are single, but I did not want to get married. I was very content being single. The great white snake says, like a drifter, I was born to walk alone. And I really, I loved that. I wanted to be, thank you. I was okay with being single and didn't desire kids. And again, I want to be sensitive to those that's not your season. But I think one thing that I've liked seeing is that the Lord has different plans, and the Lord has better plans for me than what I wanted for myself. And I think just with my specific story and my specific struggles is anymore, and that's been really, really enjoyable, honestly, and really relieving. And I've seen a lot of the Lord's protection over my life because I've just had someone else in that for me. And yeah, does that make sense? And like quoted The Office a lot at school too. So.
And Whitesnake.
I know. Yeah. Well, we're opposite. He's a little country. I'm a little rock and roll.
Wow. But you both wear black. Love it.
So good. Any more questions? No? Yes. Here, I will get that mic for you.
Great. This is kind of directed towards Courtney, because she and I have gotten to share a little bit of our stories with each other. But how has growing up in a family of origin with addiction played itself out in your marriage, and what can you share?
Oh. A lot. I can share a lot. Yeah, I really think that is really what caused the winter in our marriage. I don't know if you can speak into that as well. Yeah, I think that's why I liked being single for a really long time, honestly. And I think that is what prevented me from wanting to resolve conflict and wanting to be loved and wanting to have love. And it's not like I don't want to share these things. My dad was also a con man, and so anything that was told to me by Josh, I just never believed it. And I was carrying a lot of that into my marriage, and if there was something that he said that resembled even 1% of something Dad liked, I was like, I'm out, not doing this. Yeah, so it was really hard to discern what truth was and what trust was, and yeah, how I resolved conflict. And I shut down and I run, and that was really hard. And I am still dealing with the effects of that. I mean, my dad passed away from his addiction 2 years ago, and yeah, definitely I think a pro is learning, your attachment styles and walking through that with a therapist, and even doing like marriage counseling has been a game changer. And just knowing myself and knowing my specific triggers and my sin in those too. I mean, again, if you're in like a situation where like someone is an addict and you're being abused, like that's not your fault. But I also have sin, right? And I bring that into my marriage, and I'm not the victim of that. And I don't know. Do you have anything being on the other end of that? I feel like I'm kind of rambling.
Sit in, get ready. Just joking. No, I mean, honestly, what she's describing is, I'm going to use this term because it's the only one I can think of to describe this, is like a total deconstruction on how to relate to another person intimately. Like learning to, like she said, not have in the back of her mind this example from her dad when there's this in Joshua. Like that's a total, and it's been from birth, so it's ingrained in the brain, and so I don't know how to answer your question other than be like, it was terrible. It was really hard. It's really hard to like tear down everything that you learned as a child. These lights going down a little bit? Or am I passing out? Just looked right here and it started getting darker. Move back. Yeah, to learn to anew, and not just in a new way, but in a way that's in spite of everything she's already learned. That takes a whole lot of work. And as the one on the other side of that, it takes a ton of patience. And it's not like I was the sinless one in it, you know, like I shared with you guys last night. You know, I had $7 when we got married. She had a savings account. The bank wouldn't let me have a checking account. It was that bad. So I was very sinful and am very sinful. But yeah, just learning to understand. I mean, I think you talked about Enneagram types as well. Like, you know, just understanding one another and being able to identify, oh, you're, you know, not to put them in a box, but like, oh, you're this way, and I can see how it connects back to your story. So, I don't know. I'm rambling on now because I'm passing out. So
It's good round.
All right, I'm looking at the time. 8:45. We got time for, yeah, go for it. We got time for a couple more.
So kind of a little bit to what you were saying, like when someone in the relationship, which we all have, like family of origin or childhood wounds, how does that, like how have you related to each other in a really loving way in those spaces where maybe there is sin involved, or maybe it's just like, this pattern is so hard to break, and I know it's not your fault, but like this is causing dysfunction in our relationship. Like, how do you speak to that in love to each other when those kinds of, when that causes conflict or that shows up? Does that make sense?
I guess this is connected to Melissa's question as well, but for us, I think it's an understanding of, while we know each other's family of origin and how that has shaped us, having a agreed upon commitment and conviction and in many ways ambition that all of those things end with us, you know. Like those family lines of dysfunction on her side and on my side, not that Courtney and I are going to create a perfect family, but being together and kind of recognizing like these things that are a part of your story and these things that are a part of my story, we're a new family now, you know, like we're a new family, which means we have a new opportunity to create something that's different than what was. Not in a reactionary way like you talked about, but just in a shared way of like, let's not be the ones who repeat, you know, let's be the ones who try to create something beautifully new. And when that's there, then you can begin to call out like, hey, this is eerily similar to what was, you know, what we're trying to work against. But first you have to have that shared commitment of, hey, all of this that was in your childhood, all of this that was in my childhood, it goes in the grave with us. Margot and Milo, they're not going to get this. And if you have that shared commitment, then you can call each other to it, you know, when necessary.
Yeah, and I think too, just practically, is when you have a reaction, or if you have a reaction is knowing that boundary. You guys talked about what your therapist told you, things like that, and it was the same as I have 24 hours. So if I have a reaction towards something, I have 24 hours before like I have to address it with him. And trying to figure out like, why did I act like that? Like that was so silly. Like, why did I have this blow up reaction when you just said like, hey, how was your day? Like, and it's just things like that where I'm like, why did I react that way? I have 24 hours to think about it. That's something practical. But also I just think, if that is part of your story or your friend's story or your, you know, sister's story or your spouse's story, it's really holding on to, it's Romans 8:28, right? Is believing that God has good for us. Like that he will work all of this together for our good, and having to sit down and say, God, I don't know why you gave me this dad. I don't know why, like, he couldn't reconcile. I don't know why he didn't know you, or like, I don't know why. And those aren't mine to know. All I need to know is that I am serving the Lord, and I am going to walk that out and be obedient with my story and what he's called me to. And also believing that he is the way, the truth, and the life, right? There's nothing else that makes that bold of a statement. And so in those times where you're struggling and not knowing, is you have to like divert that to what truth really is, as opposed to what might be happening. Does that make sense? I don't know. I feel like that was helpful for us. So.
Frederick Buechner wrote a book called Crazy Holy Grace, The Healing Power of Pain and Memory. And in the book, he takes the parable of that Jesus tells about the talents, the 1, the 2, and the 5. And he says, if you'll sub out the word talent or money and sub in the word pain, your whole life will make sense. The idea is that you're not supposed to bury your pain or your family of origin trauma stories. Don't bury your pain. Don't compare your pain to somebody else's. Don't minimize your pain in light of what they're going through. Or don't look at their pain and go, what are they complaining about? They have no idea how my mom raised me or my dad raised me. He also says, don't become defined by your pain. The idea is you're supposed to steward it, trade with it, make something out of it. If it's handed to you, turn 2 into 4, turn 5 into 10, do something with it. Which means you have to show up to your real life. You have to show up to those stories and to begin stewarding them in such a way. It doesn't mean you cherish the brokenness in the way that you cherish your spouse, but you handle the brokenness and those narratives in a way that you go, okay, I'm going to hold space for this. I'm going to treat this gently and delicately. I'm going to honor this story. Not every moment of the story because it was honorable behavior, but I'm going, because it's in my life, I'm not going to be harsh. I'm going to be gentle here. And I'm going to steward this in such a way. And I'm going to share that with my spouse. And then when my spouse sees me leaning into behavior that I learned from my dad, or learned from my mom, or that I learned somewhere that is unhelpful, they can helpfully bring some course correction without saying the words, hey, you know you're acting like your dad. Nobody ever wants to hear that one. But if you're in the space to where you're going, look, I actually want good for you right now, and the behavior that you're exhibiting right now, you're leaning into a pattern of behavior that you know you don't want to be true of yourself. And so part of having a family of origin story is to get to know that story, hold space for that story, and then to begin to rewrite, in some ways, your own. But the thing that God does when he moves into your life, he does not delete the hard drive of your brain. He doesn't delete the past, as much as we might think we would like that. The reality is God moves into your real life with all that stuff in the back and says, I picked all of you, including that stuff. And I'm going to work in and through your life, not in spite of that, but because that's there. And in fact, it was your weakness that drew me to you.
Thanks. That was great. My watch died, which means it's time to go home. I'm like, I don't know what time it is anymore. So yeah, we're gonna get going. I'm gonna wrap this up. You guys can exit the stage. That seems right. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, don't worry about the chairs. Don't worry about the chairs. Thanks, you guys.
I'll leave the chair for you if you want.
Nice. Ready to sit down. All right, so just in closing, thank you. That was really wonderful. What a nice note to end on. I just want to lead you guys, bring you back to, well, a couple things. First of all, just the sheet you guys got as you walked in, again, on the back are questions, the questions from tonight's sessions are, or I think they're questions 6 and 7. I didn't get this right last night either, but these are really helpful questions. They were really well thought out. I know that these guys worked really hard on them, or just for us, so that we could actually engage in really meaningful conversation with our spouses or community. So I want you to know that those are there for you. And then at the bottom, we've got some resources listed. And then there are a couple QR codes that will lead you to Icon and Redemption Church. And those are just easy access points for you guys to get in touch with leaders at your church. And just again, even as tonight we're talking about hard things you're going to walk through, long winters, dark seasons, there are also going to be a lot of really joy-filled moments. But your leaders at your churches are there to walk with you, help answer questions, pray with you, listen, and also direct you to more community if you're in need of that, or help with therapy resources if you're in need of that. So please don't hesitate to ask for help and let people know you. And with that being said, again, thank you to all of the speakers. That was wonderful. Like Katie, I feel really, really filled up, and just a lot of that is just being in the presence of other people who are just walking the same road and fighting for it. So we're gonna go. I think I will pray one more time as we exit, as you guys go home and leave this place. You are not alone. Everything that you see, or everything that you think and feel and are leaving with is really seen by the Lord, and we believe that, and hold that in faith for all of us. So yeah, let me pray. God, again, I just pray a prayer of blessing and protection over the people that spoke, that you would just in the name of Jesus, knock out any lies, that you would crush any of the deceiver's antics that might want to thwart them from the truth and the goodness of your love and of your mercy. I pray that you protect their marriages and that they can go home with joy and thankfulness of the work that you have done. Thank you so much for each person that shared in vulnerability their lives and the work that you have done. And I pray that we would receive that and that we would be strengthened by your truth and your love, by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, who bore our shame so that we don't have to. I pray that we can enter into the covenant of marriage with hope, Jesus. Hope for the long road that it is. Thank you. We love